Welcome to Digication Scholars Conversations. I'm your host, Jeff Yan. In this episode, you will hear part one of my conversation with Alexandra Della Fera, Associate Professor for English and Co-Director for the Teaching Excellence Project Grant at Passaic Community College. More links and information about today's conversation can be found on Digication's Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Full episodes of Digication Scholars Conversations can be found on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. Welcome to Digication Scholars Conversations. I'm your host, Jeff Yan. My guest today is Alexandra Della Fera. Alex is the Associate Professor for English at Passaic Community College. She is also the Co-Director for the Teaching Excellence Project Grant. Alex.
Hi, Jeff.
Welcome.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Now, you go by Alex.
Yes, Alex is great.
And it's great having you here today. I should just be super thankful that you are able to make it, because you told me a little bit ahead of time that you actually did get, tested for COVID, and you're still here.
Yes, I know. Yesterday I tested positive. Luckily, it just feels like a cold, so hopefully, I'm pretty clear. But yeah, but I'm feeling pretty good, so we could definitely talk away.
Just so thankful for the vaccine
and
modern medicine.
I know it.
So you are at Passaic Community College. Why don't you just give us a really short, 5,000, foot level description of Passaic Community College for those who don't know?
Sure. We're an inner city community college in Paterson, New Jersey. And we're largely a Hispanic-serving institution. And increasingly, we're noticing a larger population of Middle Eastern students. And we do have African-American students that are part of the community. But by and large, we're a Hispanic-serving institution. And luckily for us, we qualify for a lot of grants because of this. So that's been working in our favor, too.
Mm-hmm. Now, your responsibility, you seem to have a lot of responsibilities. You've done a lot of grants. You teach in the English department. And you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So I've been teaching since actually at the community college level since I graduated college in 1993. So I've been at this for a pretty long time. I do love my job, but even though I've been doing this for a pretty long time, I'm always looking for ways to make my classroom experience better, to engage the students, just to deliver the material in ways that really can grip them. Increasingly, I'm finding that, students are just not reading as much, and maybe sometimes they are begrudgingly in my classroom because I'm a gen ed. They have to take my class, a composition class. So I'm always looking for ways to just excite them, to motivate them. And so this teaching hat that I wear has been working in conjunction with the other hat that I wear, which is the co-director of the Teaching Excellence Project. And essentially, it's a project geared to make teachers better teachers in the classroom. But it does become all-encompassing. It's really not just about the teachers, it's about the students, and it's just looking at all different initiatives that we really can incorporate, to consider all the cultural movements that we have, just to take a look at our technological advancements and the role that plays to our education. So it's a really exciting time for me to be a teacher, actually.
Yeah, and I think that we met, I'm going to guess by now, has to be like a couple years now ago, right?
Yeah, maybe even a little bit less.
Maybe a little
bit less. Well, then again, we were in communication before the initiative launched in March. Right in the height of the pandemic. But, and maybe we were talking, prior to launching. Yeah, but it really hasn't been that long in terms of, our work. But I'll talk to you more about how proud I am and how much we've done in such a little time. So that's been a great thing.
Well, I am too. But why don't you bring us back to that point? It's the pandemic is in, full swing, and everyone's worried, and you are at a community college, and we know that for community, there are a lot of community college enrollment went
Oh,
down
yeah.
over the pandemic, and still is down as of today. Um, and and you are trying to get you're trying to get grant funding to help with like different ways of engaging students. So, and then at some point you must have come across ePortfolio as sort of a potential sort of thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
You want to tell us a little bit about how that came about?
Sure. Actually, the very first time I saw an ePortfolio was at a conference. I was an attendee, and it was prior to the pandemic. And it was something that I had always just kind of stored in the back of my mind. We did have an ePortfolio option in our learning management system, which is Blackboard. But it was very one-dimensional. There was no visual layer. There was no aesthetic. It was just really very utilitarian. So I never used it. It just didn't suit what my vision was. So then, next thing we know, we're in the middle of this pandemic. It's March 2020. Our grant had just launched, and that summer, which was summer of 2020, the dean, which is in charge of the grant and who was the director at the time. Now we've hired somebody for his place. Now we have a team in place. But he said to me, look, we have this money and there's a lot of initiatives. Take the ball and roll with it. What would you like to do? What would you like to see done? And right away I knew, I said to him, Greg, I want to institute an ePortfolio. And he said, sure. He said, so I'm going to task you with this charge. Go out there, take a look at all the ePortfolio products out there, and you come back to me and tell me which is the best one. So that's what I did that summer. I took a look at a number of places, different schools, like the University of Rhode Island School of Design sticks out as one where I saw a lot of public ePortfolios. And then, so I kept coming back to Digication. All the examples that I saw online seemed to really, all roads led back to Digication. I really liked it. And so, when we kind of pushed a little bit further, and I went to it was the LaGuardia Community College actually website. And that is a college that's not too far from us. We're in New Jersey. So this is right over the Hudson River in New York. And what was great is that I saw a few contact names on the website at LaGuardia. And so I contacted one person who was in charge, and he was so generous with his time. He said, sure, I will love to meet you. Now, this was in the height of the pandemic still. This is the summer of 2020. Nobody was meeting in person. So he met me over Zoom. Jeff, do you remember his name?
Pablo,
yes,
maybe?
It was Pablo. That's it. It was Pablo. And he was so generous with his time. And so he gave me over an hour. Now, he didn't even know who I was. He had no really vested interest in meeting with me, but he did nonetheless. And he really gave me a much better scope of what I would need to do to roll out such an initiative, the kinds of things that should be in place. So I got a lot of really great feedback from him. And so I took that back to the dean and I said, I'm ready. So for that spring, we weren't quite ready in the fall, because in the fall, we had to get some logistical things in place. Like we had to fold in our IT team for the Blackboard integration. We had to hire a few more people for the grant team. So, we had to put everything in place first. But then once we did that, I was ready to roll out 5 courses as a pilot for the spring 2021 at this point. It's 2021.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I'm not going to lie, it was a daunting task at first. I would stay up at night sometimes before the semester started. And I'd say, oh, can I really do this? Is this going to flop? What if this flops? Then they're not going to really see how much I love this and why I love this. So I was pretty nervous. I'm not going to lie, because I wasn't in the classroom. We were all in Zoom squares. All of this had to happen over Zoom. And so it was daunting. But I have to say, Carrie, she was one of the I-team members from the Digication end who was really just so invaluable for our rollout. She was really fantastic. She worked with our ed tech specialist, Bajal, and we got it together in no time. And by that March, I was able to have 5 classes with ePortfolios created. There was an About Me page, a goals page, and then showcasing also their coursework. And so, it was incredible. It really was incredible because, again, I can't take this lightly. All of this was happening over Zoom. Never once were we even allowed to step foot on campus.
Right.
And see people. And then I invited the team to come to one of my classes. They loved it so much because we were showcasing each other's ePortfolios, because I created one as well as a model. The team loved it so much, they wanted to come to all of my classes. And they loved that so much that when our advisory committee met in June, and I was able to showcase the work that my students produced, our grant writer for our campus was at this meeting, and now he's including ePortfolio with every grant that he writes. So I have to say, it was the first few months, it really worked. It was great. It was really great.
That's amazing. So going back to some of those people that you mentioned, Pablo Avila.
Yes.
From LaGuardia Community College. He's amazing. We actually did a Digication Scholars conversation with him.
Oh, you have to send that to me.
Yeah, and I think that he's someone who I wanted to just point this out because he's someone who's in such a great model of someone in this community. And what I do find amazing about people doing ePortfolios, just like yourself and Pablo, you're just so passionate about it that, like you said, he didn't know you and he just spent an hour with you, without any knowledge of what you're going to do with it, just hopefully just lend a helping hand,
right.
Really. And I think that there's something really magical and special about ePortfolio, and the field of people who are practicing it are people who really like it very, from a very authentic and genuine place in their hearts,
Right.
I think that's
I think it's true. And, he immersed himself in the ePortfolio process prior to a pandemic. So he had, I guess, maybe different goals in mind, different desires, different outcomes he was hoping to achieve. For me, first and foremost, I needed to get to know my students. I couldn't be in the classroom with them. Sometimes because students would take the class while being somewhere else, sometimes at work, unfortunately, sometimes at a doctor's office, sometimes they were even taking my class with a mask on. So, I wanted to see my student. I wanted to get to know my students. I wanted them to get to know me, quite frankly. So, this is why I created my ePortfolio first. It wasn't just as a model, but it was for them to get to see me and, the multi-dimensional side to their teacher. And I needed to see that from them, and so it really served that initial purpose where, how can I get to know my students in the middle of this pandemic when everything about this platform desocializes us? How am I going to do this? How am I going to accomplish this? And that's really where Digication came in and kind of saved the day, I feel. And it wasn't really just for me, because my students loved it. They loved learning about each other, because just like I was feeling isolated, my students were feeling isolated. So, to be able to share who they were, pictures of their families, and sometimes they didn't even want to share those personal family photos or friends photos, but they wanted to share their interests and their hobbies, And so the fact that we were able to do that, despite this platform that really is the antithesis of socialization, it really just, so that was my initial draw. So Pablo maybe had, because he wasn't in the middle of a pandemic when he launched this. I think, was it now 15 years at LaGuardia? I know that
Yeah,
they have a
they've
robust
been doing it
program.
for a
It's
long
been
time.
years, and he
Yeah.
reminded me that Rome is not built in a day. He said,
Yeah.
what you see here it's years of growth. So I always keep that in my mind, because I know that we've accomplished a lot in just 1 year, but this is just the beginning, and then in doing everything that I did with my 5 classes, that's when I started realizing, okay, there's so many more benefits to an ePortfolio rather than just like getting to know my students. That's kind of like the icing on the cake, and so we can certainly talk about that later, but it was really,
Yeah.
really just a great thing.
Yeah, I want to talk about a couple other things that you mentioned. I think this idea of getting to know your students, and then you talked about engagement and motivation a little earlier. I actually think that in some sense, I know that you talked about it in the context of a pandemic where you can't see them in person, but I do think that it has been a looming issue in teaching and learning in higher education, actually teaching and learning in a lot of sort of modern, let's call it Western, sort of classrooms.
For sure.
Which, even when we can see people in person, we didn't used to have a way to like learn more about them or have the ability for them to express themselves in that way. There are times, and I don't know about your experience, but it's possible for you to go through a whole semester not knowing the person if they're not the kind of people who wants to really be outgoing and, share.
Very possible, unfortunately.
Yeah. And those are also the population who are most likely to drop out. Those are the most vulnerable part of the population, where they are maybe not feeling engaged. They're maybe not feeling like they belong. And that their story isn't worth sharing. And, then, this is not where I belong. And
absolutely.
So they leave.
Yeah.
So I think that you're interesting. You even were saying, well, this is icing on the cake. I think in some sense, it's icing on the cake, but it's also, it may change the narrative of how we think about engagement and what the importance of engaging the students is in a classroom.
Absolutely, because there are a ton of articles out there, educational articles, that talk about this very thing, even, prior to the pandemic, to your point, where how are we going to engage our students? How do we let them know that they are seen? How do we forge the sense of belonging that's going to ensure retention, ultimately, that they'll stay in your class? And so, and one of the litmus tests, I think, over the years that I've seen is who you have after midterms. Are you a teacher who sees like half the class drop after midterms? Because if you do, then I think you're not doing something right. And if after midterms you see that you still have a ton left, I think that, something is working because they're staying, and so that's something that I've always used as a gauge. Engagement definitely was always on my mind, and I was always looking for ways prior to the pandemic. Sometimes there's that pressure of making class fun. And I know that there are some professors who resent that. They said, look, my job here is not to make your experience fun. My job here is to teach you what you need to know. You get the information, you know this content, and you move on. But I think it's a really reductive, I know, but it's such a reductive way. I mean, they can still get all the content they need, but you can still have fun. And why does fun have to be such a bad word, And so I think that's one of the things that my students do like about my class, is that the class can be fun and class is engaging, and they know. And, I think maybe in part it's because of my discipline. I teach writing and I teach literature. And so we get to talk about ideas. Students sometimes write about their lives if they're writing a memoir. They really get to share. We always have class discussions. So we get to share opinions. And maybe because of the benefit of my discipline, they have really always known that I am there to hear them out, which I think makes the ePortfolio even more necessary if you're in a different kind of discipline. Let's say like a STEM, for instance, where maybe sometimes they feel like, they've just got to deliver the material. There's no time for discussion. There's no time for sharing of their lives. Let's just move on. I got to teach you all this material because you've got an accreditation exam to take at the end of this, all the more reason why any portfolio would be important. So,
yeah, I think that there's something interesting about this, almost it's a never-ending spiral. It's a one that's going downwards, which is, we can always add more content to a discipline. And if you are a professor, you have a lot more time to have build up that bucket of content. You can just keep building and building and building and building. And after having done it for many more years, suddenly, if you're philosophically at the root level, you think of education as being, just giving the entire bucket, however full it is, to the students. It's actually not really what I believe. That's not what education should be about. You really need to teach them how to build their own buckets.
Right.
And that's so much more interesting and so much more important, I think. And because if we are always going to be chasing content, it will never end. And I think that actually there is almost some aspect of folks that have that sort of type of philosophy in teaching. I think you're right in that some disciplines are more naturally sort of geared towards that and some are not. And I think that the ones that are more naturally geared towards that are ones that could be seen as having a finite number of things that you can just go in and say, if I cover them, then they would know all the things they need to know to be successful at this. But I think that, like you were saying in writing, or I was, used to teach in the arts and design.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I used to teach a little, in architecture and digital media.
Oh, cool.
In architecture, for example, it doesn't make people think, people who are not architects, are imagining what it's like to go to architecture school. And they think, well, they must teach you how to build a door and windows and a roof and I don't know, name your components, and a garage, and now you know how to build a house. Right. And then at some point you need to learn how to build a railing too, or whatever. Right? That's not at all how it works. For people in architecture school, they don't learn that way at all. We learn about things like, how do we define a threshold? And you get to define it yourself. Is it a door? What is a door? I mean, it's actually very philosophical.
Yeah, and a lot of freedom, it sounds like, too.
A lot of freedom. And in so many ways, because there isn't a correct way to do it. There isn't one correct way of doing it. When I studied that as a student, but when I was teaching it as well, you don't ever have this sense of, I just need to teach you this, and then we can move on. It's more like, you could spend your entire career just thinking about doors.
Literally.
And that would be enough.
Yeah,
that would last a lifetime.
Wow.
You could be thinking about building, and anyway, so the point really is that it's almost like, because it's so limitless, same with people who are in the art, if you're in graphic design, in fashion design, or in music, or in dance, there's just, there's no limits to this. So it's not like you just kind of go through a list of 10 things and at the end you have it. It's really just giving you the basic, tools so that you can acquire more
Right.
things.
Right.
And I think that, when we look at, sort of zooming out into what a higher education experience should look like, maybe one that is in a community college or just in any college, really, I think that, our role is much more about letting the students figure out what their bucket looks like and in what ways they want to accumulate their own sort of experience and knowledge.
By the way, do you miss teaching at all?
Oh, a lot.
You do, huh?
Last time I taught was in 2006.
See, I didn't even know that about you.
Yeah, so that was a long time ago. I mean, having a real class, in a semester,
right.
was in 2006, and I missed it. I missed it a great deal, and I was very lucky to be in an environment that was so supportive, and both as a teacher, but also the students, and I really loved it, and it really formed a lot of the philosophy of why we build Digication and the way that we built it.
Good.
Now back to some of the things that you talked about, though. You were sort of talking about the students liking it and being able to. No, do they see each other's portfolios?
Yes, I do allow that, and I allow it within Blackboard. So only my class can see each other. So no other class can see, no other teacher can see. So it's just in the self-contained unit. And I did that on purpose because I really wanted to forge that sense of community, and they had no problems with that. If there was something they didn't want to share about themselves, like a personal photo, let's say, they would just choose a different kind of photo, a photo that represented something that, is a hobby, let's say. So they made it work for them, but they were still sharing in the text what we need to know about them, the things that they thought we should hear and know in order for them to be seen in the way that they wanted us to see them. And by the way, I'm going to say too that prior to launching it and prior to having them create their ePortfolios, I did have to have a discussion about audience, who their audience is, and tone, what their tone should be like, because I kept stressing this is not social media. This is not the same thing. Because in fact, I did have a few students who wanted to share themselves in a way that they do over social media, like Snapchat or Instagram. And honestly, Jeff, it really was just not appropriate. It was not appropriate. I had a few females, scantily clad and in very seductive poses. And so, I did have to go through that because sometimes they were a little bit confused as to how they were sharing and why they were sharing and to whom they're sharing. So that had to be part of the conversation when you roll out. That was important because some of them are just so used to presenting themselves in a way on social media, and this is for a completely different purpose. So
that's a fabulous observation, and there's something about social media that I'm having really difficult time with.
What's that?
I think that there is obviously a great deal of social medias, that has to do with a lot of the platforms and why they do it and what it is that they're trying to do. So I lived in Silicon Valley for 10 years, so I see a lot of the sort of almost like the inner working of like how the sausage is made, and it's I mean, I must say it's scary and ugly. I mean, whether you are talking about YouTube, Facebook, Instagram or Snapchat, what have you, they make money whenever you stay on their websites. When they because by that it translates to advertisers and eyeballs, and that's the main thing. And they are very willing to. I mean, these are really smart people. They're really, really, really willing to do what they need to do to get that engagement, get that sort of thing. But this engagement is different from our engagement that we talked about earlier. The one that you were talking about earlier is about being seen, being heard, being recognized, you know? And this is a lot more about at all costs, how do we get people to stay? So, you know, for example, at, you know, Facebook, they talk about, I mean, we found out recently, I guess, in their own, you know, research and finding that if we make people angry, they stay because they have more posts. When they're more, when they feel anger, when they feel like something needs to be done because it's not right, you know, they will do that. But that also, you know, creates the incentive for them to, I don't know, to just be more, to create a more extreme opinions and opinionated sort of set of content to get you to react.
Yeah, feeding the beast.
And so I think that's a really dangerous thing. And when you were just talking about what students are transferring their experience from social media to, you know, in this case, in the portfolio. But it's just that the idea of this is who I am and this is how I, you know, want to present myself. So it's less about be heard, be seen. It's a little bit about feeding your own sort of like the maybe, you know, a lack of confidence or ego, or sort of this weird social contract that people have now. You know, do people like this? And do I want to curate some sort of, you know, like best life?
Yeah,
you know, like
right.
Looking at people's Instagram photos because they are seeing that, well, my life doesn't look like that. I don't have all these amazing meals and then have a puppy to come home to, and then, you know, and then a love partner to share all this. And traveling to like these amazing places.
Yeah, it becomes
it's
toxic.
Like, wow. It becomes, and then you just look at what who you are, and you're like, wow, mine doesn't look like this.
No.
This concludes part 1 of our conversation. To hear part 2, be sure to subscribe to Digication Scholars Conversations on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. The Digication Scholars Conversation series is brought to you by Digication, a technology platform powering the most innovative ePortfolio programs in K-12 and higher education. Our website can be found at digication.com. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please like, subscribe, and share with a friend. Thanks for tuning in.